Marvellous, marvellous player.
Clear, you're in.
Yeah, and he deserved it.
Falling towards Shearer, he scored!
Alan Shearer was absolutely horrifying to face, even for the hardest men in English football. Picture St. James's Park in September 2001. Newcastle are clinging to a 4-3 lead over Manchester United. The clock is running down. Roy Keane wants the ball back quickly for a throw-in, because a quick throw-in can change a match in seconds. Shearer will not let that happen. He stands there, he blocks the throw, he does not shout, he does not panic. He simply refuses to move. Keane, one of the most feared leaders in football, loses his temper completely. He throws the ball at Shearer. He swings a punch. The referee has no choice. Keane is sent off. And through all of it, Shearer stays completely calm, as if nothing happened at all. That single moment tells you almost everything you need to know about why Alan Shearer terrified people. He did not need his fists to win that fight. He won it with patience and control. And if you already remember how much fear Shearer caused defenders across an entire career, use the hype feature to give this video some hype as we look at why even football legends could not handle him. Football legends who played with him and against him would later describe that same pattern again and again, from the biggest center-backs in Europe down to England's own hardest midfielders. Football in England during that period rewarded strikers who could handle punishment as much as it rewarded pure skill. A forward who flinched under a hard challenge would be targeted relentlessly for the rest of the afternoon, while one who stood his ground earned a strange kind of respect from the very players trying to stop him. Some strikers in that era tried to avoid the hardest defenders. They looked for space away from the biggest hits. Shearer did the opposite. He seemed to enjoy the fight. Great defenders could bruise him, cut him, and knock him to the ground, but they could never frighten him. Over and over again, the toughest men in football described the same pattern when they talked about facing him. To understand why, we have to go back to the very start, long before the goals, the records, and the statue outside St. James's Park. Alan Shearer was only 18 years old when he first showed the football world what he was made of. He was playing for Southampton, stepping into a senior match against Arsenal, one of the strongest teams in the country. Nobody expected a teenager to dominate that stage. Shearer scored a hat-trick on his full debut, 3 goals, against a serious defense from a boy who had barely started his career. Matt Letizier, who played alongside him that day, later explained why that hat-trick mattered so much. It was not just about the goals, it was about how calm Shearer looked while he scored them. Most young players show nerves. Most young players flinch when the pressure builds. Letizier said Shearer already carried a mental toughness that was rare for someone so young. Even when opponents rattled him with hard tackles, he did not show it on his face. He simply turned that frustration into more goals. This matters because people sometimes assume Shearer's fearsome reputation grew later. Once he became famous and powerful, that is not true. The core of it was there from his very first season. He believed in himself completely. He accepted physical punishment without flinching. He controlled his emotions when the whistle blew, and he had a direct hunger to score that never seemed to fade, no matter how hard a defender tried to stop him. A young striker at that age is usually still learning how to survive against grown men who have played senior football for years. Most 18-year-olds get pushed around. Most 18-year-olds look for the referee's help after a hard challenge. Shearer did not play like a teenager at all. He played like a man who already knew exactly who he was going to become. And defenders twice his age found that unsettling before he had even scored his first senior goal. It helps to remember what English football was like at that time. The top flight was brutally physical. Center-backs were built and coached to use strength, elbows, and intimidation to break a striker's confidence. Forwards could be shoved, kicked, and worn down over 90 minutes until they stopped competing for the ball at all. That was the normal weapon used against strikers. A young forward without genuine physical courage could be quietly removed from a match without the crowd ever noticing, simply through relentless shoves and heavy contact every time the ball came near him. Shearer would spend the rest of his career turning that weapon back on the men who tried to use it. Instead of being worn down by that physical treatment, he made defenders feel the exact same pressure they were used to handing out to everyone else. He did not stay at Southampton for long. His performances were far too good to ignore, and soon one of the biggest transfers in English football history was taking shape. Blackburn Rovers signed him, and it was there that the frightening striker the whole country would come to know was truly built. At Blackburn, Shearer became one of the most ruthless goal scorers the Premier League had ever seen. He was paired with Chris Sutton up front, and together they became known as the SAS, a strike partnership that terrified defenses across England. In the 1994 to 1995 season, that partnership helped fire Blackburn Rovers to the Premier League title, an extraordinary achievement for a club that size. Blackburn were not one of the traditional giants of English football. They did not have the history of Manchester United or the size of Liverpool. Yet, with Shearer leading the line, they were able to go toe-to-toe with the biggest clubs in the country and come out on top. Defenses that had comfortably handled smaller clubs in previous seasons suddenly found themselves facing a striker who simply refused to be shut out of a match, no matter how the opposition set up against him. The partnership with Chris Sutton worked because the two strikers complemented each other perfectly. Sutton could hold the ball, bring others into play, and win his own share of aerial battles, while Shearer focused relentlessly on finding the smallest gap to finish. Defenses that organized themselves to stop one of them almost always left an opening for the other. And very few backlines in the country had an answer for both threats at once across a full 90 minutes. What made Shearer so dangerous was not just his physical presence, it was the sheer range of ways he could hurt you. From 25 to 30 yards out, he could strike a shot with so little backswing that goalkeepers barely had time to react. People who played with him and against him described those shots as rockets, hit with a technique that looked simple but was almost impossible to copy. In the air, he was just as dangerous, attacking crosses with timing and raw power that few defenders could match. From the penalty spot, he became almost unstoppable, driving the ball low and hard into the corners with a force that punished any goalkeeper who guessed wrong. He reached 100 Premier League goals in just 124 appearances, a pace that stood as a benchmark for almost 30 years before anyone came close to matching it. Think about that for a moment. A player reaching triple figures faster than almost anyone else in the history of English football's top division. It would be a mistake to picture Shearer as only a powerful target man who bullied his way to goals. Duncan Ferguson, a forward who was no stranger to physical battles himself, placed Shearer among the truly world-class strikers he had seen, naming him in the same breath as Wayne Rooney. That is a serious statement from someone who understood exactly how hard it was to compete at that level. The problem Shearer created for defenders was that he never gave them one single thing to focus on. A defender might prepare for his strength. He might prepare for his heading. He might prepare for his shooting range. But Shearer forced them to defend every single option at once, and one mistake in any of those areas could end with the ball in the net. Coaches could spend an entire week preparing a defense to deal with just one of those threats, and it would still not be enough. Shut down his shooting range, and he would beat you in the air. Double up on him at corners, and he would find half a yard to strike from distance instead. There was no single tactical plan that solved the problem, because Shearer himself was the problem in every part of the penalty area, for every single minute of the match. His club career was building fear across England, but the true test of his mental strength came on the international stage, where the whole country was watching and waiting for him to fail. Before the European Championships in 1996, Shearer went 12 matches for England without scoring a single goal. 12 matches is a long time for a leading international striker to go without a goal, and the pressure on him from newspapers, pundits, and fans grew heavier with every match that passed. Most players in that position start to doubt themselves. Their body language changes. Their confidence cracks in front of the cameras. Imagine being the country's most expensive striker, carrying the hopes of an entire nation into a home tournament, while every newspaper column asks whether you have lost your touch. That is exactly the position Shearer was in as Euro '96 approached. A weaker mind would have gone into that tournament already half-beaten, flinching at every half chance instead of trusting the process that had made him so dangerous in the first place. Shearer did not crack. Publicly, he stayed confident, telling people close to him that he would score once the tournament actually began. He was not pretending. He genuinely believed it. When Euro '96 arrived, Shearer delivered in extraordinary fashion, finishing the tournament as the top scorer and winning the Golden Boot in front of his own country. Rob Lee, who played alongside Shearer for years, believed that this mental strength was actually his single greatest asset. It explains why defenders could never simply wait him out. A normal striker might lose confidence after a rough patch, and a smart defender could exploit that dip. Shearer never gave them that chance. Misses did not break him. Criticism from the newspapers did not change how he carried himself on the pitch. If anything, pressure seemed to sharpen his focus rather than soften it. This is exactly why the 12-match drought before Euro '96 matters so much to this story. It was not simply a personal test for Shearer. It was proof, in front of the whole country, that nothing outside forces could do to him would change how he approached the very next match. Defenders across Europe were watching that tournament too, and every one of them saw a striker who had just come through the hardest kind of pressure and answered it with a golden boot. That mental strength was about to be tested in an entirely different way, because the biggest transfer decision of his career was just around the corner. By 1996, Shearer was the most wanted striker in English football. Manchester United, led by the legendary Sir Alex Ferguson, wanted him badly. United were the dominant force in the country, offering trophies, glory, and a clear path to more silverware. Most ambitious young strikers would have jumped at that chance without hesitation. Sir Alex Ferguson was building one of the greatest teams English football had ever produced, and he saw Shearer as the final piece. Any young player chasing medals and trophies for the rest of their career would have found that offer almost impossible to refuse. It represented the surest route to becoming a champion, season after season, in a United shirt. Shearer turned Ferguson and Manchester United down, not once, but twice. That decision alone tells you something about the man behind the goals. He was not chasing the easiest path to glory. He was choosing the path that meant the most to him personally, whatever the risk attached to it. Instead, he chose to join his boyhood club, Newcastle United, the team he had supported as a child growing up in the city. Newcastle paid a world record fee of £15 million to bring him home. That was not a small, romantic decision made lightly. It came with an enormous weight attached to it. Think about what Shearer was accepting. He was the most expensive footballer on the planet at that moment. He was joining the club of his home city, where every fan, every local paper, and every conversation in every pub would be about him. He was taking on the club's famous number 9 shirt, a shirt that carried the history and hope of generations of supporters. Every defender in the league would now target him even harder. Knowing that beating Newcastle's record signing was the ultimate prize, there was nowhere to hide from any of it. A player who joins a club far from home can escape some of the pressure when he goes back to his own city. Shearer had no such escape. His family, his childhood friends, and every person who had watched him grow up were now watching him carry that shirt every single week. A single quiet season, a single injury, or a single dip in form would have been felt by an entire city, not just a dressing room. Most players who take on that kind of hometown pressure eventually buckle under it. The expectations grow heavier every year, and the gap between what supporters demand and what any one player can realistically deliver usually becomes impossible to close. Shearer never let that gap open up. He simply kept scoring, year after year, until the pressure that would have broken most careers instead became the foundation of his legend. Many players would have crumbled under expectations like that. Shearer welcomed it. He went on to break Jackie Milburn's long-standing goal-scoring record for the club, a record that had stood for generations before he finally passed it. Milburn's name had been spoken with reverence in that city for decades, and overtaking him was not a small footnote in Shearer's career. It was the moment he became a permanent part of Newcastle's own history, standing alongside a name every supporter already knew by heart. Today, a statue of Alan Shearer stands outside St. James Park, a permanent reminder of what he gave to that shirt and that city. Supporters walk past it before every home match, a lasting symbol of a player who chose loyalty and pressure over an easier path to glory elsewhere. By now, it should be clear that Shearer was fast, powerful, clinical, and mentally unbreakable. But the deepest proof of just how terrifying he was does not come from statistics. It comes from the words of the very defenders who had to face him, man against man, week after week, for years. Marcel Desailly was a World Cup winning defender, one of the most feared center-backs of his generation, a man built to physically dominate any striker put in front of him. When Desailly talked about facing Shearer, his message was simple and direct. You could not intimidate him. That single line captures something enormous. Most forwards, even very good ones, can be unsettled by heavy contact, hard words, or a defender standing over them after a tackle. Shearer simply did not respond to any of that the way other players did. Desailly discovered that no amount of physical pressure changed how Shearer played the very next minute. Defenders at Desailly's level had spent entire careers finding the one thing that would break a striker's rhythm. Against most forwards, that search eventually succeeded. Against Shearer, Desailly found nothing that worked, no matter how hard he tried, and he said so plainly whenever he was asked about the toughest opponent of his career. Tony Adams, the great Arsenal captain, gave us a different piece of the picture. Adams remembered his battles with Shearer as genuine wars, full of heavy aerial duels and bruising physical contact. Both men, he said, would often come off the pitch with cuts on their heads after facing each other. That detail alone tells you how serious these contests were. Yet Adams also remembered something else. After 90 brutal minutes, Shearer would offer him a genuine handshake. This was not about faking respect for the cameras. Shearer earned that respect the hard way by taking the exact same punishment he handed out match after match without complaint. Adams was captain of one of the most fearsome defenses English football has ever seen, a defense built on discipline, organization, and sheer physical will. For a player like that to speak about Shearer with genuine respect, rather than simple frustration, says a great deal. It was not the respect you give a lucky opponent. It was the respect one warrior gives another after surviving the exact same battle from opposite sides. Martin Keown of Arsenal knew that punishment personally. In December 2001, at Highbury, Keown and Shearer clashed fiercely, with elbows flying in the tightest areas of the pitch. Keown came away from that match with a large visible bump on his forehead. Shearer simply refused to give up space near the penalty area, no matter how hard Keown fought to win it back. These were not friendly meetings. They were uncompromising battles between two men who both refused to back down. Keown was known across the league as one of the most physically committed defenders of his era, a man who rarely backed away from a challenge himself. The fact that a single afternoon against Shearer left a visible mark on his forehead shows just how far both men were willing to go to win a few inches of space inside that penalty area. Paul Gascoigne, who played alongside Shearer for England, saw a slightly different side of the story. Opponents regularly tried to rattle Shearer using heavy, aggressive tackling, hoping to knock him out of his rhythm early in a match. Gascoigne explained that Shearer gave as good as he took. He would not roll over. Any attempt to physically bully him into submission usually produced an immediate response, and defenders quickly learned that trying to intimidate Shearer often backfired badly on them instead. Gascoigne had spent years in dressing rooms alongside Shearer, watching him prepare for matches and react to the punishment he took on the pitch. What stood out to him was not that Shearer avoided hard tackles altogether, because nobody in that era truly could. What stood out was how quickly he answered them, often within the very same passage of play, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about what would happen if they tried it again. Then there is Les Ferdinand, who played alongside Shearer at Newcastle and understood his game as well as anyone. Ferdinand's assessment was blunt. There is no chink at all in Shearer's armor. Put together everything we have already heard: the strength, the heading, the shooting from distance, the ice-cold penalties, the positioning, and the mental control, and you start to understand exactly what Ferdinand meant. Every single legend here describes a different part of the same enormous problem. Shearer never gave a defender a safe plan. There was no obvious weakness to exploit and no soft spot to attack. Ferdinand did not simply admire Shearer from a distance. He trained alongside him every single week, watched him prepare, and saw firsthand how completely rounded his game truly was. When a teammate who saw everything up close says there is no weakness at all, it carries far more weight than praise from an outsider ever could. Line those 5 accounts up next to each other, and a clear pattern emerges. A World Cup winning defender who found no way through his composure. A hardened Arsenal captain who respected the punishment he took without complaint. A combative marker left with a visible bump from trying to win an inch of ground. A midfielder who watched him answer every hard tackle without ever backing down. A club teammate who trained beside him and still could not find a single flaw. These were not casual opinions from journalists or supporters. They were first-hand accounts from men who had to face him directly, and every single one of them arrived at nearly the same conclusion. Understanding why he was so hard to handle physically means looking closely at something most fans in the stands never fully notice: the moment before the ball even arrives. Long before a cross or a pass reached him, Shearer was already fighting his battle. He would position his body early, using his powerful lower body and his broad frame to physically back into the center back standing behind him. This pinned the defender in place, making it almost impossible for him to step around and attack the ball first. Shearer used his arms to create extra space around himself, and he used his elbows for leverage, holding his ground even under heavy pressure. Faced with this, defenders were often left with an impossible choice: either foul him to stop him getting the ball cleanly, or simply give up ground and let him have it. This is a skill that never shows up on a highlights reel because there is no dramatic moment to point to. There is no diving header or thundering strike in the build-up itself. There is simply a striker quietly winning a small physical argument, a full second or two before the pass even leaves his teammate's foot, and a defender slowly realizing he has already lost the position he needed. Shearer himself was honest about why he played this way. He explained that in the Premier League of that era, forwards had to look after themselves, because if they did not, brutal defenders would happily bury them and end their afternoon early. In his mind, this physical resistance was not aggression for its own sake. It was simple survival in one of the toughest leagues in world football. Younger forwards who tried to play politely against the same defenders often disappeared from matches entirely, shoved and jostled out of dangerous areas until they stopped competing for the ball at all. Shearer never let that happen to him. He accepted early on that softness would be punished instantly in that league, and he built his entire physical approach around making absolutely sure it never happened to him. Think about the sequence step by step. First, Shearer gains his position early, often before the ball has even been played. Second, the defender behind him is trapped, unable to get in front to challenge cleanly. Third, that defender cannot attack the ball with any real power or timing. Fourth, Shearer is now free to turn, lay the ball off to a teammate, win a foul, or attack the cross himself with a clear advantage. In many cases, the real battle was already over before the crowd even saw the ball arrive in the penalty area. Watch closely, and you can see the same pattern repeat itself over and over across an entire match. A corner is swung in, and Shearer has already claimed his ground. A long ball is played forward, and Shearer has already turned his marker away from the play. None of it looks especially dramatic in the moment, yet by the final whistle, a defender could look back and realize he had spent 90 minutes constantly, one step behind a striker who never stopped working for position. That kind of relentless, unglamorous effort is often the difference between a very good striker and a truly great one. Anyone can score when they are given a free header in an empty penalty area. Very few players can manufacture that free header themselves, over and over, against defenders who are actively fighting to stop it happening. Shearer built an entire career on doing exactly that, match after match, long before the crowd ever noticed the header had even arrived. That relentless physical approach walked a fine line, and on two notable occasions in his career, that line was tested in public. In 1998, during a match against Leicester City, Shearer was involved in a moment that quickly became controversial. His boot connected with Neil Lennon's head as he tried to free his foot following a challenge. It looked alarming in the moment, and it drew heavy attention afterwards. Shearer explained that he was simply trying to pull his foot free and had not meant to strike Lennon at all. The Football Association investigated the incident and cleared Shearer of any misconduct, a decision that was supported by Lennon's own testimony about what actually happened. It remains an example of how close Shearer's uncompromising style could sometimes move towards real controversy, even without any deliberate intent behind it. Moments like that are a useful reminder that Shearer's game was never entirely safe or gentle. A striker who plays with that much physical commitment will always find himself close to the line from time to time. And this incident shows exactly how thin that line could be. It also shows how seriously the authorities examined it, rather than simply accepting the most alarming version of events at face value. The clash with Roy Keane, which we saw at the very start of this story, deserves the full context now. Newcastle were beating Manchester United 4-3 at St. James's Park in September 2001. Late in the match, with Newcastle desperately protecting that lead, Shearer deliberately blocked Keane from taking a quick throw-in. It seems like a small thing, but in football, seconds matter enormously when you're trying to protect a result. Keane, already boiling with frustration, threw the ball at Shearer and swung a punch at him. The referee had no option. Keane received a straight red card and was sent off the pitch. Through every second of it, Shearer stayed completely calm. Roy Keane was widely regarded as one of the most intense competitors English football had ever produced. A captain who intimidated plenty of opponents simply by staring them down. Getting a player like that to lose all control, in front of a packed stadium and national TV cameras, was not something ordinary players could manage. Shearer did it with nothing more than patience and a well-timed delay near the touchline. This was not simply physical bravery in the face of an angry opponent. It was game management and psychological control of the very highest level. Shearer deliberately slowed down the restart to frustrate one of the most competitive leaders in football history, and it worked exactly as he wanted. He did not need to throw a single punch to win that confrontation. He won it by making Roy Keane lose control of himself completely. Plenty of players would have matched Keane's aggression in that moment, throwing punches of their own and getting sent off alongside him. Shearer understood that staying completely calm was a far more powerful weapon. By refusing to react at all, he turned Keane's frustration into Keane's own downfall, and Newcastle held on to their lead, with United now down to 10 men. Everything so far has focused on strength, physical courage, and mental toughness. But reducing Shearer to only those qualities misses the most important part of the story, because underneath all of that power was a genuinely elite football talent. Sir Bobby Robson, Shearer's manager at Newcastle, offered one of the clearest assessments of his ability. Robson explained that Shearer simply did not have a clear technical weakness. He was a complete forward in every sense of the word. A manager of Robson's stature had worked with some of the finest players in world football, and he had seen plenty of strikers with obvious gaps in their game. One might be lethal in the air, but weak with the ball at his feet. Another might strike a ball beautifully from distance but struggle in a crowded penalty area. Robson looked at Shearer and simply could not find that gap. And when a manager with that experience says a player has no technical weakness at all, it is one of the highest compliments in the entire sport. He could score practically every type of goal you can imagine in football. His long-range shooting, struck with barely any backswing, made him lethal from 25 to 30 yards out. A shot goalkeepers had almost no warning was even coming. In the air, his timing and raw power made him one of the most dangerous headers of the ball the English game had ever seen, capable of powering in crosses that smaller forwards could only watch sail past them. From the penalty spot, he hit the ball with such force into the top corners that even legendary goalkeepers, such as Peter Schmeichel and David Seaman, found his penalties almost impossible to save, no matter which way they dived. This combination created a genuinely brutal problem for opponents. Even the smallest defensive mistake against Shearer, a half step out of position or a slightly hesitant clearance, could be punished instantly and severely. A defender might do everything right for 89 minutes of a match and still lose the game in the final minute, simply because one hesitant touch gave Shearer the smallest sliver of an opening. As Les Ferdinand already told us, there truly was no chink in his armor. And that phrase becomes even more powerful once you see the full technical picture behind it. It would be easy to assume Shearer terrified defenders simply because he was strong enough to knock them over. That misses the real point entirely. He was terrifying because he could survive brutal physical contact and still produce a world-class finish in the very same passage of play. Strength alone never won him a single goal. Strength earned him the room and the time. Technique is what made that room absolutely deadly. This is the piece that separates Shearer from a simple physical bully in a striker's shirt. Plenty of forwards throughout football history have used size and strength to win space. Very few of them could then convert that space into a goal with the same reliability that Shearer showed, match after match, season after season, against the best defenses the country had to offer. Put every single piece of this story together, and the picture becomes very clear. A teenager with no visible fear, a club striker who could win a title almost single-handedly, an international forward who thrived under the heaviest possible pressure, a record signing who chose loyalty over the easiest route to glory, a physical force who never lost a battle with the toughest defenders in the country, a tactician who won position before the ball even arrived, a player who walked right up to the edge of controversy without ever losing his discipline, and underneath every part of that reputation, a technically flawless finisher who could punish any mistake from any distance with either foot or his head. All of this brings us to the numbers and to the final judgment on a career that redefined what it meant to be a frightening striker. Alan Shearer finished his career with 260 Premier League goals, the all-time scoring record in the competition's history, a total that has never been beaten. He won one Premier League title, lifted with Blackburn Rovers in that unforgettable 1994 to 1995 season, proving early on that he could carry a smaller club to the very top of English football. For England, he scored 30 goals in 63 appearances, and he captained his country at both the 1998 World Cup and Euro 2000, two of the biggest stages in world football. Wearing the armband through some of the highest pressure moments the national team has ever faced. At the Premier League's 10th Anniversary Awards, he was named the overall player of the decade, standing above every other player from that era. a period packed with genuinely world-class talent across the entire division. At Newcastle, he broke the club's all-time scoring record, a mark that had belonged to a club legend for generations, and today his statue stands outside St. James' Park for every new generation of supporters to see, long after his boots were finally hung up for good. None of those achievements happened by accident, and none of them happened because opponents were afraid to compete with him. They happened because Shearer forced every single one of those opponents to fight him on his own terms. Week after week, season after season, for well over a decade at the very top of English football. No single defender, however strong, however experienced, ever solved the puzzle he presented, and no single tactic ever contained him for an entire season. That is what made him not just a great goal scorer, but a genuinely terrifying opponent for anyone unlucky enough to be handed the job of marking him. Marcel Desailly could not intimidate him. Tony Adams respected every ounce of punishment he willingly accepted. Paul Gascoigne saw with his own eyes that he would never roll over, no matter how hard opponents tried. Sir Bobby Robson looked at his entire game and could not find a single technical weakness. His records prove that the fear he created was never wasted. It produced lasting, unmatched results across an entire career. In the end, that is the real story behind the fear he created. A fear built entirely on substance, rather than mere reputation. Defenders did not fear Alan Shearer simply because of his reputation. They feared him because every single part of his game gave that reputation real, undeniable, lasting proof. From a fearless teenager at Southampton to a record-breaking legend at Newcastle, he never once gave the toughest men in football an easy night, and that, in the end, is exactly why they still talk about him with a mixture of respect and genuine relief that their careers against him are finally over.